This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. I had a comment today on the HX Effects video by Lysander, and he asked the question, or said, you know, he's personally found that he prefers the sound of individual pedals, and I think that was kind of a across the board kind of statement. So I wanted to, I don't know, test this for myself. So I've got my favourite reverb pedal, which is the Walrus Audio Slo, and I've got also an Ibanez Super Distortion, which I'm going to put into the Mesobuki Mark III. I'm also going to do the same sort of experiment with an HX effect and see if I can answer for myself, would I actually be happier with individual pedals, or is there more to the story than this? That's Nemo. Lenny had a scan and is all clear. The baby's fine. It's not here yet, by the way, so don't go congratulating anyone yet. Baby's still inside her. So you saw some clips there, and hopefully you've got some opinions on them. If you want to skip, I put it in a section at the end of the video where you can reveal this, because I'm not really in this to try and convince anyone of anything. It was more just to see for myself again, because these sort of comments come up occasionally, and I ask myself, you know, maybe I am missing out, or maybe one is missing out. Like, I'm not making specific gear recommendations. I'm just trying to get good results out of what I've got. So yeah, it made sense to do these two, because the reverb is an element which is very difficult to get super close sounding matches and stuff, because there's so much complexity that could go into a reverb effect. And then it also made sense on the drive side of things to compare something that is actually in the Helix. So the Ibanez SD9 is in there. So I think there is a very clear way to sort of understand some of this stuff and make differentiation. I think when it comes to reverb and delay, a lot of these pedals are going to be doing analog to digital conversions anyway. And if you're using many of these and you're worried about fidelity, then in a way you'd be better off, I think, this might be true, with a multi-effects. If you're worried about the clearest signal, and if you're worried about the fidelity of your tone and that sort of stuff. Other people might have the opinion that certain effects pedals, you know, whether they're reverbs or delays, or, you know, any of the stuff with digital chips in there, might impart positive artifacts on the tone. So again, there's no real right or wrong with this, but it is fair to say that if you had sort of 3-4 of these types of pedals in there doing ADA stuff, then in theory, unless it's all passing through a dry signal as well, then you might end up with better, more accurate, something less coloured tone through an HX effect, or a fractal device or something like that. I think that probably would be non-controversial to say. However, the other thing is that the reverb that I used to get this within Helix was the dynamic plate, and there's, you know, just many more parameters on it to try and get somewhere in the ballpark. You know, you've got decay on here, you've got filter, you've got depth, and you've got mix. It's really quite a lot more simple. On the HX effects, what I had to do was take the reverb down onto a parallel path, and then also put a retro reel after it to get some of that modulation. It didn't take loads of time, but again, the simplicity of having the thing just there, and I think maybe I slightly prefer the tone of that for that particular sound anyway, but either reverb tone for me could totally get the job done. So unless I think you've got a really specific reverb delay pedal that is doing a thing, I've not found stuff that the Helix really struggles with. So I managed to sort of get, I think, fairly close to the Keeley Halo with the Helix. I've done a comparison of the Boss RE202, their digital space echo that they brought out this year, and I thought the Helix could really get in that ballpark too. There's some certain things within Strymon pedals and some really specialist stuff like Empress, which maybe is a little bit difficult to get totally in the ballpark of, but I think you can get pretty close. The other aspect, of course, is the drive pedal, and I think the drive pedal is quite a different thing, because these don't have analog to digital conversions in there, do they? Typically, I think it's a bit more of a rudimentary thing, and it's just a couple of clipping stages in most cases. I can see there being a bit more of an argument for these being a little bit more the type of thing that you'd possibly want to keep. So with the comparisons that I did of this, I felt like the tone on this was somewhat less bright and maybe had a little bit more low end. And typically with these types of pedals, there's not loads of tweaking that you could do, because they have like a tone knob, which is kind of rudimentary. There's a level knob and there's a distortion knob. Similarly in the HX effects where they modeled it, they've got that.
Now, I think it'd be also fair to say about accuracy that one Ibanez SD9 could, in theory, sound quite different to another. So this is just one example of a pedal, and quite an old example of a pedal. There might have been, you know, some bleeding going on with these. There might be, you know, component drift. I can't say for sure that the Helix is not an accurate version of the pedal that they had, but equally, you know, if I was really wanting the sound of this Ibanez SD9, I'd have to tweak this drive a bit, you know, probably bring up the bass with an EQ a bit and bring in the highs a bit. Yeah, I think drives might be the one area where I might say, well, you know, if you've really got some favorite drives that you've got, then why not put one on a board? You don't really lose too much by doing it. The reason I think that people have chosen to go down this multi-effects route, like what is the fuss about multi-effects, is that it's so much more convenient, I think, than building pedal boards, and in most cases far cheaper. You know, you don't have to worry about necessarily buying all of the cable ties, all of the cables, all of the cable management, all of the pedal board, Velcro, all of this sort of stuff, an actual pedal board itself. And then, you know, buying the individual pedals easily can cost upwards of £3,000 to £6,000, depending on how crazy you go with your board. If you look at Joey Landreth's board from that pedal show, you know, that's a board which probably costs upwards of sort of $6,000. You know, if he did have to pay for some of them, of course, he's an artist, he's going to get sent a bunch of this stuff for free. But, you know, to be able to get the sorts of sounds of these things, and I think they're within a close enough kind of distance, you know, is it 5% out? I don't know. Could you tell in a blind test? I think myself, without much tweaking there, I could get them in a ballpark. You know, they're not exact one-to-one copies of the pedals that I've got right here, but certainly they're getting the vibe, and I wouldn't say they necessarily sound worse. So, you know, you can get the experience of this kind of thing. You can build way more complex presets if that's what you're into, but at the same time, if you're a person who generally only uses 2-3 pedals at a time, and you're not necessarily doing fly gigs, with a board of that size, then there's no reason that you have to change things up. You know, the multi-effect revolution is optional. You don't have to get involved in it if you don't want to. And I think you could replicate this sort of test with pretty much any other modeler, and you'll probably find similar sorts of results. Maybe Fractal might be slightly more accurate. Maybe with the Quad Cortex you could get slightly more accurate drives some of the time. Maybe if you did it with a tube screamer, you wouldn't get so accurate. Maybe with a fuzz pedal, you'd probably be better off using a model. And maybe you'd find, you know, with the Quad Cortex, you couldn't do some of these really kind of spacey ambient reverb sounds quite so easily at the moment. Or maybe you find, yeah, whatever, you might need to keep bits and pieces. But I think it's probably, my opinion is, that's what the fuss about some of this stuff is that you can get really close to these results without having to spend quite as much money, and you put it in a form factor that is way more convenient, a lot easier to sort of travel light with, and you know, that's kind of what it's all about. I think if you have infinite money and you're really into building massive pedal boards or even small pedal boards, you know, no one's suggesting that you shouldn't do that. And I think there's plenty of people out there that use real pedals alongside their modelers or anything like that. Some people like to mix things up. Some people will only ever be really happy with a real tube amp, apparently. And that's also fine too. Not really a problem. As long as you're playing guitar, that's the main thing, isn't it? To sum up, my experience has been that with almost any amp, any pedal, anything like that I've tried with the Helix to do this kind of A/B with, they've been really quite close. And if you want to get really in-depth with tweaking, you can get them to a stage where I personally can't pick them apart in a blind test. I think the thing is that with Line 6 and Fractal and these kind of devices, they're doing exactly this amount of work. They're just doing it again and again, building loads of algorithms. Companies like Strymon or Walrus Audio or Empress, they build quite a few algorithms, but not the kind of breadth and not the amount that you would get in something like a Fractal Audio FM3 or a Line 6 device or even a Quad Cortex, you know. So there is this value kind of element to it, right? And that's, I think, part of why people are attracted to it. Equally as well, I don't think anyone necessarily really believes that you get exactly the tone of like a Lexicon legendary reverb if you buy a plug-in version of it. But I think people kind of accept that like you can get pretty close and you can get the vibe of these things, and maybe that's enough. And also, a limitation is that tweaking this stuff, it takes a person to do it, and so my limitations are part of this as well as the Helix limitations. If there are some, you know, it's also down to me as the person working the piece of gear. For sure, pedals can be quite a bit simpler, but if you're building a real pedal board and you kind of view it, I'm building a virtual pedal board within the Helix, I think you can also do some really creative things. So for me, I think that's what the fuss is about multi-effects. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Feel free to like and subscribe. Go play guitar.